Alright guys, today I wanted to make a video on basically Harry Maguire's criticism pretty much because so for those of you who didn't see in the England game against Ivory Coast friendly on Tuesday, Harry Maguire was booed quite a lot by the England supporters pretty much every time he touched the ball. And for me, that's a bit unacceptable, to be honest, because player who like gives his best for the team, and by the way, for England, he ain't really put a foot wrong. In fact, he's contributed a lot more for England than I think anybody else would have done if they'd played instead of him. Um, because of like the amount of goals he scored. He scored actually a couple of goals in the past year that have actually like helped England get points that they or get through rounds where they might not have done if he hadn't scored. So I feel as though for England fans to be criticising him is a bit unfair, very unfair actually. In fact, just wrong. But for Man United fans, I can understand the criticism of him, but you don't boo him because he is giving his best and he's just not having a good time with it. I think there are a few players in the Premier League who deserve to be booed, but that's more down to behaviour or, yeah, pretty much behaviour. Like if a player's giving their best and the only reason you're booing them is because they're playing bad, but they're trying their hardest, then you're in the wrong, not the player, in my opinion. But if it's a case like Kurt Zuma, or I don't know, if Mason Greenwood had have played after what's happened with him over the past few months, then there's like, reasons for you to boo them. But for Harry Maguire, there's no reason for it. But the onto the actual criticism. So I've established that I think booing Harry Maguire's wrong. Criticism, I think you can't if you're in England, or you can't criticise how he's played for England because for England he's only really played well. In fact, I think he might have even got into the Euros team of the tournament last year. So that is an achievement in itself, and he was instrumental to England getting to within a few penalty kicks away from lifting the trophy, and he scored the best penalty of the tournament, by the way, in that shootout, a rocket into the top corner. And yeah, for England, he's only ever done well, I think. But for Man United this season, he hasn't been up to the standards he was at the back end of last season. That's just a fact, really. But I think you can say that pretty much about Man United as a whole. But I just think with Maguire, he deserves a bit of criticism, maybe because he hasn't been up to the level that he usually has. But I think you can say that about a lot of United players. The reason it gets directed at Maguire is because of Man United, if anything. It's because the fact that they ridiculously overpaid for him. 75 million for Virgil van Dijk was about the right price. Harry Maguire is a defender who is not at the level of Virgil van Dijk, aka he's not the best centre-back in the world. But he's still a very good centre-back. If United had paid 40 or 50 million for him, like Arsenal just paid 50 million for Ben White. If United had if United had paid Leicester 50 million for him back in 2019, I think it was, then it wouldn't be talked about that much. They paid 50 million for Wan-Bissaka, and I would argue Maguire's been the better out of the two for England. For Man United, sorry. But it's because he's like, it almost like it gets clicks or attention if a media publication it makes it about Maguire, whereas if they made it about Wan-Bissaka, or if they made it about who else has been a big signing and played poor for United this season, if they made it about Sancho, it doesn't draw as much attention. But because it's Maguire and Rashford, they're like household names now to the English public, so it gets them more attention. And I just think there's so many Man United players that have been underperforming this season. I think Ronaldo has been, well, no, maybe not Ronaldo, because I mean he is 37, so you can let Ronaldo off of it. But McTominay hasn't been up to scratch, I don't think. Luke Shaw hasn't been as good as he was last season. Wan-Bissaka. Who else? Pretty much anyone in their holding midfield, I don't think. Fred has been all right. But they just so many underperforming players that are to blame for United, and I just think Maguire's one of them. He's not the sole reason that United are currently looking like they're going to be finishing in a Europa League spot as opposed to a Champions League spot this season. So yeah, I think it's slightly unfair to put the amount of criticism that's currently being put on Maguire. I think his performances are warranting some sort of like criticisms of his game. That, say for example, there's times where he's out of position. There's times where he gets dragged out and like leaves gaps in behind, and obviously he hasn't quite got the pace to get back or such. So whatever it's down to what you think, really. But it is unacceptable to boo a player because he's not playing his best football at the moment. It's just unfair. Maguire didn't really choose to be an £80 million player, do you know what I mean? It's the fact that United were desperate for a centre-back and they wanted Maguire and Leicester wanted 80 million. So it's not the player's fault. But having said that, Maguire does need to improve if he does want to be sure of an England spot, because I think with him getting into the England team, I would have him in the squad. Probably, if anything, because of the previous performances. I think you give him a bit of leeway because of that. Like, you can't go from being the best defender in the entire tournament a year ago to being dropped from the squad a year later. But however, if his performances do continue for Man United over the next 8 months, then there is going to be questions raised, especially if players like Mark Guehi, Ben White, John Stones, Connor Cody all keep performing, then, you know, there is possibility. But yeah, I do think some of the criticisms being made against Maguire are a bit harsh, but I also think he is underperforming massively. So yeah, anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.